Well, now we move to the French defence, another very common visitor to the club players board. And perhaps surprisingly, I'm going to recommend that white plays the exchange variation. The main reason for this is that I think that the line with 4 knight f3 contains more than a drop of poison from white's perspective. And I can assure you that e takes d5 is the very last move that the French player wants to see on the board. He or she's going to think, oh my goodness, this is another boring exchange variation. Why did I bother to turn up tonight? Well, they're going to be in for a slight surprise, as the main intention in playing e takes d5 on your behalf is to play flat out for the win. One thing e takes d5 does is to transform the position. The pawn structure in the centre is changed, and we've got a much more open type of game than the French player is used to. He's used to block centres and manoeuvring on the flanks. This is a far more open struggle, and more often than not leads to a position where white has an isolated pawn. Now, to start off with, let's try to highlight the dangers that black faces in this line by looking at the first game, Tregubov, Grandmaster, versus Svetlana Matveeva, and this game was played in the Russian Cup in Tomsk back in 1998. I should say that this is a variation which doesn't really date. You can't really attach any theoretical significance to a line with e takes d5. Instead, it's ideas that matter most. So black played knight c6, and white just brought his bishop out to d3. Black played bishop d6, white castled, and now the characteristic idea which black employs quite frequently in this line, knight ge7. And the main reason black plays his knight to e7 is to facilitate bishop f5. The idea is that black, by playing bishop f5, gets rid of his worst bishop. We managed to determine which bishop is worse by looking at the colour of the centre pawn. Thus white's worst bishop, because the pawn's on a dark square, is the bishop on c1. So knight ge7 makes sense. And now one of the characteristic moves of this line, c4. White is willing to inherit an isolated queen's pawn in return for open play. And we note that white has even wasted a tempo to get this position. Bishop d3 first, then c4, and bishop takes c4. Well, black castled, and white played knight to c3. Another move here is pawn up to h3, preventing bishop g4. But as we'll see from our featured game, bishop g4 is not that dangerous. So white gave the bishop a tap, and the bishop retreated to h5. The first cute point is that bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, knight takes d4, doesn't win a pawn because of queen takes b7. And of course white is better in this position with the two bishops and the better pawn structure. So black retreated with bishop h5 in the game, and now white went on with g4, bishop g6, and now pawn up to a3. And the point of that move is to preserve the bishop on the diagonal from a2 to f7. It's important that white keeps this bishop cemented on c4, or at least on that diagonal. And the long-term idea is to manage to play knight e5 as marked, followed by perhaps f4 and then f5, swamping that bishop on g6. So black's got to be careful that bishop on g6 just doesn't get swamped. h5. Well, maybe the sensible queen d7 was better, and white just goes on with rook e8, perhaps intending knight d5 at knight e5 at some point, and then f4. h5 looks risky. White played bishop e3, and black played a queen up to d7, whereupon white now played knight h4. And here we see a key plan in this line. White is intending to go f4 and then f5. Rook a d8, black doesn't seem too concerned by this, and now white just gets on with f4. So from a quiet looking position out of the opening, we've actually reached a very sharp middle game position, where black has to defend for his life. Bishop h7 was answered by queen f3. White could also have chosen f5, swamping the bishop, and if black had gone bishop g3, then knight f3. To me, this looks very promising for white. White still has a very dangerous attack here, and this bishop is completely immobile. But queen f3 is a good move as well. Black played knight c8, and Tregubov just brought his rook into the middle. Again, f5 was a possibility. Black did the same, and now knight to g2. A safe enough move, protecting everything, but maybe not the best. I mean, I think, again, f5 was definitely a move to be considered very carefully here. If knight b6, just bishop a2. Here we see the point of a3 in the first place, and only now knight g2, intending a kingside pawn storm with g5 and perhaps f6 or g6. So we see from this opening play that actually White's idea is far from quiet, far from drawish. In fact, it's a very sharp move indeed. Very sharp idea. Matveeva brought her knight into c4, and White went bishop g5. Knight takes b2. Well, of course, this move, bishop g5, is more awkward for Black than it appears, because Black cannot play f6. The pawn on f7's pinned. Instead, she's got to go on a kind of wild goose chase here with knight takes b2 and hope that she can gain enough compensation for the exchange when White eventually takes on d8. In the game, Matveeva played knight to c4, and now, interestingly, White played a4, going more or less for the win straight away. I mean, obviously, once again, he can take on d8, knight d2, queen takes b7, queen takes d8, and then we get a very sharp position after queen takes a7, takes, and now queen f6, intending queen h6. White prefers to avoid that and to play a4 instead. And Matveeva played bishop e7. White captured, Black recaptured, and now rook fd1 stopped Black from forking on d2. Black took on g4 and played the queen to g5. Throughout this game, Black is hampered by the very poor position of the bishop on h7. In effect, Black's almost playing a piece down. White played a5, and now a mistake, perhaps in time trouble. Knight d2 was played. Of course, Black's got to take this pawn on a5 and hope for the best. But knight d2 was answered by rook takes d2, queen takes d2, and now rook d1. Perhaps Black didn't think this was possible because of queen b2, and now a takes b6. But White now pressed on with g5, king f8, again perhaps prompted by time trouble, g6, and now f6. The crowning blow, and showing very clearly what White is intending to do in this line. After g takes f6, queen takes f6, Black resigned, as White has numerous checkmating threats. So, an excellent game and a good introduction to this system, and we can call it a system, with e takes d5 and then knight f3. It's far more dangerous than it looks.